My name is Robert, 74 years old, and I have lived a life most people would envy. I built my fortune with my own 2 hands, starting with nothing but a toolbox, a stubborn spirit, and a mind that refused to accept defeat. Over the decades, I turned a small repair business into a chain of companies that gave me not only financial security but the luxury to provide for my family in ways I never dreamed possible. My wife and I raised our only son in comfort, giving him the education, the home, and the stability I never had as a child. I thought I had done everything right, but sometimes life finds a way to remind you that no matter how much you give, some people will only see you for what they can take. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. My son had been married to Emily for 8 years. At first, she seemed perfect for him, bright, charming, the kind of woman who knew how to make you feel welcome in a room. But as the years went by, I noticed a subtle shift in her tone. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she spoke to me. The way conversations about family dinners became more about convenience for her and less about connection. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, families have ups and downs, and maybe she was just stressed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw me less as a father-in-law and more as an obstacle. I still lived in my mansion, at the edge of town. It was more house than I needed after my wife passed. But every brick, every beam of wood, held a piece of my history. I built it 25 years ago when my business first took off. My wife picked the paint colors, the garden layout, and the stained glass for the front door. My son grew up there. I thought one day it would pass to him. That morning, Emily came by with a certain look on her face. The kind of look people get when they've made up their mind about something and they're just waiting for you to catch up. My son wasn't with her. She stepped into the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and sat across from me without even asking how I was doing. "Robert," she began, her voice tight and businesslike. "I think it's time we had a serious talk about, well, your situation." "My situation," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "Yes, you live alone in this massive place. It's not practical. You can't keep up with it forever. It's becoming a burden for you, and frankly, for us." I felt a flicker of unease, but I tried to keep my tone calm. "I managed just fine. Emily, I've got a gardener, a housekeeper," she cut me off, with a small, pitying smile. "Robert, that's not the point. You shouldn't have to spend the rest of your years rattling around in this house. You could move into a nice assisted living community. They take care of everything, and you'd have company. It's safer. And you could sell the mansion." I stopped her right there. "Sell the mansion?" Her voice hardened. "Yes, and we could use the money to make sure your needs are met long term. You know these places aren't cheap. And, well, it's not just about you. We're a family, we need to think about the future." There was something in the way she said "we" that made my skin crawl. I asked her bluntly if this was my son's idea too. She hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to know the truth. That's when she said it. Words that would burn themselves into my memory. "Robert, you're just a burden now." I felt the air leave my lungs. A burden. As if my entire life, every sacrifice, every late night building my business, every dollar I'd invested into making their lives comfortable, all of it meant nothing because I was no longer in my prime. My mind went quiet in that way it does when anger is too deep to show on the surface. I didn't respond right away. I simply looked at her. She crossed her legs, clearly expecting me to eventually agree, maybe even thank her for thinking ahead. But in that moment, something shifted in me. I realized that my future, my dignity, was not something I was going to let her decide. Told her that conversation was over, and that she could see herself out. She left with a smirk, as if she'd planted a seed she was sure would grow. But little did she know, I had a very different plan taking shape in my mind. You see, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to read people, and you learn, but sometimes the best way to deal with greed is not to confront it head on, but to outsmart it completely. That night, I sat at my old oak desk, looking at the deeds and documents I'd kept neatly filed for decades. I thought about my late wife, about how much this house had meant to us. I thought about my son, my own flesh and blood, who apparently didn't have the spine to stop his wife from insulting me. And then I thought about who actually deserved this house, who would truly value it, and that's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't just going to be about keeping the mansion out of Emily's hands. This was going to be about making a statement so loud that neither she nor my son would ever forget it. They thought I was a burden. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I stood in the doorway of my study that night, staring at the shelves filled with books I had collected over a lifetime. They smelled faintly of dust and history, like they carried the weight of every page I had ever turned. These books had been my companions during lonely nights, my teachers when I didn't know where else to learn. I reached out and ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the indentations in the leather covers, thinking about how soon they might no longer belong to me. Her words were still ringing in my ears. "You're just a burden now." That sentence had dug itself into my chest like a splinter. I thought of my wife, Margaret. She passed away 7 years ago, but I could almost hear her voice telling me to be strong, telling me to stand my ground. She loved this house more than anything, not because it was big or expensive, but because we built our life here. Every corner held a memory. The crack in the kitchen wall was from the time our son, Matthew, kicked a ball indoors and swore he didn't. The faint stain on the dining room table was from Margaret, spilling red wine the night we celebrated our 30th anniversary. I looked at all of it, and the thought of someone else walking through these halls without understanding any of it filled me with a strange kind of grief. Matthew wasn't home that night. He had gone on another business dinner, which usually meant his wife was in charge of the house. I could hear her faint laughter coming from the living room where she was on a video call. I knew better than to interrupt her, so I stayed upstairs, pacing back and forth, thinking about what I was going to do. You see, I had been foolish. I trusted my son and his wife with too much. When Margaret died, I rewrote my will so Matthew would get the house. It was worth several million ocean views, large gardens, a place most people only dream of. But I never imagined he'd marry someone who would look at me not as a father-in-law, but as an inconvenience. The next morning, I came down for breakfast, and she was already there, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Morning," I said. No reply. I poured myself coffee and sat down, trying to keep my voice calm. I was thinking, I began, maybe we could start having family dinners again. Like when Matthew was younger, you, him, maybe even the grandkids. If she cut me off without even lifting her eyes from the screen. "Robert, I think it's time you started making other arrangements. You need more care. This house isn't practical for you anymore." I felt my jaw tighten. "Other arrangements?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. She sighed, put the phone down, and finally looked at me. "An assisted living facility. There's a place not far from here. It's modern, clean. You'll have people looking after you all the time. Honestly, it'll be better for everyone. Better for everyone." The way she said it made it sound like I was a piece of old furniture that needed to be put in storage. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm perfectly capable of living in my own home." She smirked. "For now, but Matthew and I have plans for this place. Robert, big plans. And it's not fair to keep everything tied up just because you can't let go." Those words hit me harder than I thought they would. Plans for this place. That's when I realized it. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted the house. I finished my coffee without saying another word, but my mind was racing. Over the next week, I started noticing little things. Real estate brochures left out on the counter, conversations between her and Matthew that went quiet as soon as I walked in. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "If we sell now," she said, "we can move to that property near the marina. It's perfect for us, and we'll have enough left over to invest." Matthew's voice was lower, almost uncertain. "But Dad," she cut him off. "Robert will be fine. He needs professional care anyway. You know that." I stepped back before they could notice me, my heart pounding. My own son was being pulled into this, and maybe, just maybe, he was letting it happen. That night, I sat alone in my study again, thinking about Margaret and what she would have told me to do. She always believed in standing up for what's right, even if it meant upsetting people. And suddenly, a thought struck me. The house wasn't legally theirs yet. My will left it to Matthew, but as long as I was alive, I could still change it. The next morning, I made a phone call. It was to an old friend of mine, Daniel, who happened to be one of the sharpest lawyers I had ever known. We'd served in the Navy together decades ago, and if there was one thing I trusted him with, it was my back. I told him everything, what she said, what I'd overheard, how I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. He listened quietly, and then he said, "Robert, if you want to make sure they don't get their hands on the house, we can do that, but you're going to have to act fast." I met with him 2 days later in his office downtown. He was the same as I remembered, direct.com, with a way of cutting through nonsense. We went through every document I had. The will, the deed, everything. By the time I left, I had signed new papers. The house was no longer going to Matthew. In my will, I didn't tell Daniel who it was going to, instead, not yet. I had someone in mind, but I wanted to make sure every detail was perfect first. When I returned home that evening, Matthew was there. He greeted me with a smile, but I could tell it was forced. "Hey Dad, we've been talking, and we think you should check out this care home this weekend. It's really nice." I looked at him, searching his face for the boy I used to know, the one who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, the one who sat on my shoulders during fireworks. But all I saw was a man torn between loyalty to me and the influence of his wife. I smiled faintly and said, "Sure son, let's take a look." Inside, though, I already knew, I was never going to that care home, and they had no idea the surprise I was preparing for them. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the dark ceiling, the sound of the grandfather clock echoing through the empty hallways. The words kept replaying in my head, "You're just a burden now." They didn't feel like just words anymore. They felt like a verdict, a declaration of what I had become in my own home. My hands rested on my chest as I took deep breaths, thinking about all the years I'd worked, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into building not just the mansion, but the life inside it. And now, it was as though none of it mattered. The next morning, I tried to act as though nothing had changed. I went to the kitchen for breakfast, but the moment I walked in, I could feel the air shift. My daughter-in-law, Clara, was at the table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I entered. I poured myself a cup, sat down quietly, and began buttering a slice of toast. "Robert," she said suddenly, still not making eye contact, "we've been talking. Maybe it's time you consider other living arrangements. Somewhere more manageable for someone your age." I froze, the knife in my hand hovering over the bread. I turned to her slowly. "Other living arrangements?" She finally looked up, her eyes cold. "Yes, you know, a retirement home. It would be better for everyone. You'd have company, activities, and people your own age to talk to." My jaw tightened. "Better for everyone, or better for you?" She gave a slight smirk. "You're overreacting. This house is big, Robert, too big for one old man to roam around in. And it's not like you use most of it anymore. Meanwhile, we could make real use of the space, turn it into something lively again." I stared at her, realizing what she was implying. She wanted the house, not just for comfort or convenience, but as something to claim. My son entered the kitchen a few moments later, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, pouring himself coffee. Clara shot him a look, and he cleared his throat. "Dad, we were just talking about the house. Maybe Clara's right. It's not safe for you here alone when we're not around. It's better if you—" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "If I move out so you can take over? Is that what this is?" He looked guilty, but not enough to back down. "That's not what I said. But honestly, it makes sense. The place is too much for you to maintain, and you've been slowing down. We're just thinking of your well-being." I pushed my chair back and stood up, my heart pounding. "My well-being, or your gain?" I left the kitchen without waiting for an answer, my toast untouched, my coffee growing cold on the table. For the rest of the day, I wandered through the house, running my hands along the wooden banisters, tracing the patterns on the walls, stopping to look at photographs that lined the hallway. Memories flooded me: Christmas mornings, birthdays, the night I carried my wife across the threshold when the mansion was finally ours. Every corner of this house had a story, and now they wanted me gone, as though I was an old piece of furniture, taking up space. That evening, I sat in my study, the one room that still felt truly mine. I pulled out an old wooden box from the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were documents, letters, and a copy of my will. I flipped through the papers, my fingers trembling slightly. I had built my fortune through decades of hard work in the construction business, and I had always intended for my son to inherit the house. But the way things were now, I wasn't so sure. The thought of changing my will sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just about taking something away from them, it was about making a statement, about showing them that you can't treat people like they're disposable, that love and respect aren't something you owe only to the young and capable. Over the next few days, Clara's attitude became bolder. She began making small remarks about how the kitchen could use a remodel, or how the guest rooms would make great offices. She spoke about the house as though it was already hers. My son stayed mostly quiet, but his silence was a kind of agreement that cut even deeper. One afternoon, I overheard them in the living room, speaking in hushed voices. Clara was saying, "If he moves out, we can list it, sell it fast, and get a smaller place. The money would set us up perfectly." My chest tightened. So, it wasn't even about living here, it was about selling the house, cashing in on what I had built. I stepped back quietly before they noticed me, my mind already turning over a plan. That night, I made a call to my lawyer, an old friend, named Henry. We met the next day at his office, where I told him everything, how they'd been treating me, the comments, the plans. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Robert," he said, "you have every right to decide what happens to your property. If you want to change your will, we can do that immediately. But you need to be sure, because once it's done, there's no taking it back." I looked him dead in the eyes. "Henry, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." We spent hours drafting the changes. The mansion would no longer go to my son and his wife. Instead, it would be gifted to someone else, entirely someone who would appreciate it, who would see it as a home and not just a paycheck. I had someone in mind already, though I didn't tell Henry just yet. By the time I left his office, I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness for what my family had become, and satisfaction knowing I still had control over my own fate. The mansion wasn't just a building, it was my life's work, my pride, and I would not let it fall into the hands of people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be moved out of the way. In the days that followed, I kept my decision quiet. I went about my routine as if nothing had happened, letting them believe I was still wrestling with the idea of leaving. But inside, I was already picturing the look on their faces when they learned the truth. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake, but I wanted them to feel, for just one moment, the weight of what they had thrown away. Asterisk section 4 of my story begins in the days after Emma and Michael left the mansion. The silence in the house felt almost alive, like it had been holding its breath for years and was finally letting it out. I walked through the halls slowly, my hand brushing against the walls, each step echoing in a space that had been filled with so much noise, laughter, and more recently the emptiness was heavy, but there was also a strange peace in it. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to tiptoe around my own home. I didn't have to brace myself for sharp words or cold stares. But the peace wasn't without its challenges. The weight of what had just happened was sinking in. My son and daughter-in-law, people I thought would be my family until my last breath, had shown me a side I never imagined existed. Michael had still not reached out. Emma hadn't either. I suppose they were still reeling from the shock, maybe even angry enough to cut me out entirely. Part of me wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to ask him why. But another part of me knew that this wasn't the time to chase after someone who had already turned their back on me. Asterisk instead, I turned my attention to my new not tenant, exactly my new housemate. Lucas. He moved into the mansion the very next day, suitcase in hand and eyes wide in disbelief. I could see the R written all over his face. "I still can't believe you're letting me live here," he said as he stepped inside. "It's not just living here, Lucas," I told him, "it's your home now too." The way his eyes softened told me he understood this was more than just about a roof over his head. This was about giving him the security and chance he had been denied for so long. Lucas was respectful in a way that made me think of a bygone era. He took care not to disturb me, but he was also warm, often asking if I wanted company for dinner, or if I needed help with anything around the house. We started sharing meals together, and those dinners became the highlight of my days. He would tell me about the books he was reading, the job interviews he was lining up, and sometimes even the struggles he still carried from his past. I listened without judgment, offering advice only when he asked. In return, he listened to my stories about Margaret, about raising Michael, about the early days when this mansion was just a dream we were building brick by brick. The more time I spent with Lucas, the more I realized how much I had been starving for genuine connection. For years, my interactions with Emma had been laced with tension, and with Michael, a strange, growing distance. Now, here was someone who looked me in the eye when I spoke, who valued my words, and who didn't see me as a burden to be managed. One evening, as we sat in the library, I told him, "You know, Lucas, you've brought life back into this house." He smiled, a little shyly, and said, "I think you've given me life, Robert. Fair trade, but life has a way of testing our resolve, and my test came sooner than I expected." About a month after Lucas moved in, I got a call from Michael. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I could hear Emma in the background, her voice muffled, but unmistakably sharp. "Come over tomorrow," I told him. The next day, he arrived alone, but I could feel Emma's influence in every word he spoke. He sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly together. "Dad," he began, "I think you overreacted. Emma didn't mean what she said. She's just been stressed." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence fill the space until he shifted uncomfortably. Overreacted, I finally said, my voice calm but firm. Michael, she told me I was a burden, that you'd be better off without me. And you didn't defend me. You didn't stand up for your own father. His eyes flickered, and I saw something like guilt flash across his face, but it was gone in an instant. I was caught off guard. He muttered. I didn't know how to respond. I leaned forward. You had weeks to respond, Michael, and you chose silence. Do you know what that told me? That you agreed with her. He shook his head, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he changed the subject. Emma and I are in a tough spot financially. Selling the house would have helped us. That hit me like a cold slap. So it was about the house all along, I said, my voice breaking just a little. Not about family, not about love, just money. Michael didn't answer. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. I stood up, my decision final. The mansion is no longer yours to think about. I've given it to someone who values it and me far more than you do. His head jerked up. What do you mean, you've given it away? He demanded. I said, it belongs to Lucas now. He's part of my life, and he's shown me more kindness in 1 month than you and Emma have in years. Michael's face turned red, and he stood up abruptly. You'll regret this, he snapped. But, as I watched him walk out the door, I knew I wouldn't. I had spent too many years trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it. Now, I was choosing myself. In the weeks that followed, Michael didn't call again, neither did Emma. I thought it would hurt more than it did, but instead, I felt lighter. Lucas and I continued building our own little household. We started a tradition of Sunday dinners, inviting a few of his friends and some of my old neighbors. The house was filled with laughter and conversation again, and I could almost feel Margaret smiling down on us. One night, as Lucas and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, he said, Robert, I don't know why you picked me, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. I looked at him and said, you already do, son. And I meant it. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes, it's the people who show up when you need them, who stay when everyone else walks away. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt unwanted, unappreciated, or like you were just a burden to the people who should have loved you most, I want you to remember this: you are worth more than their neglect. You have the right to choose who you give your time, your love, and your home to. Sometimes, letting go isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something far better. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And maybe, just maybe, send it to someone who needs to be reminded that they deserve love and respect no matter what. I took a deep breath as I sat alone in my study that night. The firelight flickering against the old wooden shelves. The storm outside had grown stronger, and each clap of thunder seemed to echo the turmoil inside me. I stared at the photograph on my desk, a picture of me, my late wife Margaret, and our son Thomas. Taken in front of the mansion on the day we moved in, Margaret had a smile so bright it could have lit up the darkest room. She loved this place. She poured her soul into every detail, from the grand staircase to the rose garden outside. She always said, Robert, this home will be our legacy. And yet, here I was, hours away from signing it away to someone who wasn't even family. I thought about what Margaret would say if she knew. For a moment, my resolve faltered. But then I remembered Emily's cold voice telling me I was a burden. I remembered the way Thomas didn't defend me. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next morning, I dressed in my best suit, the kind I used to wear when I still went into the office, back when people respected me. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. I drove into town, the streets still wet and glistening in the morning sun. The mansion's title was in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. My lawyer, Henry, was already waiting for me at the notary's office. He was an old friend, someone who had been with me through business deals, property purchases, and even Margaret's will. He looked at me with concern as I walked in. Robert, are you sure about this? He asked, quietly. Once you sign, there's no going back. I nodded. Henry, I'm more sure about this than anything I've done in years. The new owner was already there too, a young woman named Claire. She ran a small charity that provided housing for women and children in crisis. I had met her just 2 weeks earlier after reading an article about her work. Something about her kindness, her dedication, reminded me of Margaret. She didn't know the full story about why I was giving her the mansion. I didn't want her to. It wasn't about revenge alone. It was about making sure the house went to someone who would truly value it. Claire shook my hand and thanked me repeatedly, tears welling in her eyes. I told her only that it was time for the house to serve a new purpose. When I signed the papers, a strange calm washed over me. It was done. When I drove back, I parked down the street from the mansion instead of pulling into the driveway. I sat there for a while, looking at the house from a distance. It wasn't mine anymore. In a way, that hurt, but it also felt liberating. I knew Emily and Thomas would soon find out, and I wasn't going to hide from their reaction. I wanted to be there when they learned the truth. It happened that evening. Thomas came into my room without knocking, his face pale and tense. "Dad, what did you do?" Emily was right behind him, her eyes wide with rage. "Tell me you didn't," she demanded. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them both, letting the silence stretch. "I did," I said finally. "I signed the mansion over to someone else. It's no longer in our family." Emily's face went red. "Are you insane? That's our inheritance. That house was supposed to be passed down." I cut her off. "No, that house was my home, Margaret's home, and I will decide who it goes to. You made it very clear you thought I was nothing but a burden. Well, burdens don't leave you with mansions." Thomas's voice cracked as he stepped forward. "Dad, we could have worked something out." "You didn't have to." I stood up, meeting his eyes. "When your wife disrespected me in my own home, you stayed silent. That told me everything I needed to know. The house will now shelter women and children who have nowhere else to go, people who will appreciate it." Emily scoffed. "You've ruined us." "No," I said quietly, "I've freed myself." They left the room without another word, slamming the door behind them. I could hear Emily shouting at Thomas in the hallway, her voice dripping with fury. I didn't care. I sat down again, feeling lighter than I had in years. The mansion was gone, but so was the weight of their greed. In the days that followed, I heard bits and pieces about how they were struggling financially. They had been counting on that property for their future, but without it, they had to make do with their own earnings. For once, they couldn't lean on me. I, on the other hand, visited the mansion again a week later, not as an owner, but as a guest. Claire invited me to see the renovations her team had already started. They were turning Margaret's old sewing room into a play area for children. The dining room was going to be a community kitchen. I walked through the halls and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Margaret would have loved this. Before I left, Claire hugged me and said, "You've changed lives, Robert." I smiled and told her, "No, I've just put the house in the right hands." Driving away, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about taking something away. It's about giving it to someone who will treasure it far more than the people who took it for granted. If you've ever been underestimated, mistreated, or made to feel like you no longer matter, let this be a reminder. Your worth isn't defined by the people who fail to see it. You hold the power to decide who benefits from your generosity, your love, and your legacy. Don't be afraid to stand your ground, even if it means making choices others won't understand.